Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of the Doors of Heritage podcast, which will be part of the Windsor Essex 2022 virtual Jane's Walk. My name is Cindy, and for this podcast, local historian Robert Honor and his wife, professional genealogist Deborah Honor, will guide us along the historical mile in Amherstburg. Let's begin with our first stop on the tour. Robert, can you start us off?
Our first stop is Fort Malden National Historic Site. In 1794, Britain and the United States signed the Jay's Treaty, which established the border between British North America and the new United States. That's the Great Lakes. Locally, the border went down the Detroit River. This left the British fort at Detroit, Fort Lerneau, on the wrong side of the border. Britain had to withdraw and establish a new fortification on the east side of the river. They chose a site opposite Île aux Bois Blancs at the mouth of the Detroit River. This area had been settled by fur traders come farmers since 1784 and was known as Malden. The new British fort was named Fort Amherstburg. Fort Amherstburg played a pivotal role in Canadian history during the War of 1812 and the Upper Canadian Rebellions of 1837 and 38. By 1851, troops were withdrawn from the fort.
Thanks for that history, Robert. Deborah, what are our next few stops on the tour?
The next couple of stops are the Toddy Jones Park and the murals on the high school. Look far across the park and you will see General Amherst Secondary School, which has magnificent artwork on the side wall where each panel speaks to both the community's and Canada's history and the milestones which have shaped the nation we know today. These panels depict the story of life in Canada from the late 1600s to the early 1900s. Looking far across the two parks is a view of Sandwich Street. We are also approaching Rankin Avenue. Both these streets started their lives as rope walks in the days before there were any streets here on the military reserve. These long, well-trodden spaces became part of the street layout when the property was developed after 1875.
Wow, thanks, Deborah, for those interesting stories. Robert, where do we go from here?
We'll be visiting Rankin Avenue with its beautiful Victorian-era architecture. The streets of Old Amherstburg abound with architecture that reflects old world charm. This street is on the old military reserve and sits on the ruined site of the old rope walk.
Deborah, where do we go from here on our tour?
On the left, we see two houses that now house Chicanos and Mariners Bed and Breakfast. Notice they have the same shape and size. The window locations are similar, even to the box bay window on the porch. Chicanos is more original. Mariners B&B was modernized in the 1940s. The Pensioners Cottage in Amherstburg's Kings Navy Yard Park has been relocated to preserve this unique history, but also to complement the experiences provided by the Parkhouse Museum. Inside, you will see two long-forgotten trades showcased, tinsmithing and a printing press. The Park House, built in the late 1700s, was instrumental in Canada's fur trade industry and today is considered Detroit's oldest building. Please visit the Park House Museum to learn more about its interesting history.
Thanks, Deborah. That's some great information. And this brings us to the prized Kings Navy Yard Park area. Robert, what can you tell us about this section of the tour?
This whole section of the riverfront from Fort Malden south to the town were military departments, including such offices as the commissariat, the shipbuilding yards, the harbor, wood yards, and straw yards. Set back from the street and to the left of the park house is the commissariat office. This charming little brick building was built about 1835 as the office for the commissariat department at Fort Malden. Today the building sits in the Kings Navy Yard Park and is home to the Amherstburg Provincial Marine Reenactment Society.
Thanks, Robert. I must admit the Navy Yard Park is one of my favorite spots in Amherstburg, and knowing the history about that area really makes it come to life. Deborah, what can you tell us as we look to Richmond Street?
Richmond Street marks the south boundary of the military reserve. As we cross the street, we are leaving Fort Malden and entering the village that grew up beside it. The corners at Richmond and Dalhousie do not quite line up. They mark a boundary. Amherstburg is one of the earliest towns developed in Ontario. We have now reached the foot of Richmond Street, and what do we see but banks on the two corners? In the early 1800s, commerce was dependent on the barter system. In the early years, the fur trade fueled the economy. This great wealth flowed from places like Amherstburg through Montreal. By 1820, the fur trade was waning, and the economy was climbing out of a depression following the devastation of the War of 1812. The economy became focused on land development, shipping, and export of crops and natural products. The Richmond and Dalhousie corner has been an important financial hub of the community and a testament to the economic prowess Amherstburg has shown since its inception.
Fascinating stuff. Thanks, Deborah. I always wondered, Robert, about the history surrounding the Gordon House and Murray Street. Can you fill us in a bit?
Yes, the Gordon House was once part of the Northwest Fur Trading Company mentioned earlier. It had several owners. However, we owe its beautiful architectural design featuring both Georgian and neoclassical elements on both the inside and the outside to James Gordon. Today, the building is owned by the town of Amherstburg and contains municipal offices. The corner of Murray and Dalhousie Street was the main corner in town. This was the location of Market Square and the main docking in downtown Amherstburg. Murray Street led up from the river and was the town's main street and included hotels, shops, and dwellings. Then in 1875, there was the Great Fire. Pumper boats were able to douse the buildings near the river with water, so the White Horse and British North American hotels were undamaged, and the Taylor building on the southeast corner was only slightly damaged. But the large stone house, now owned by the Canadian Legion, was just barely saved. I guess there were benefits to a Great Fire, and this was urban renewal. After the fire in 1875, downtown Amherstburg saw a huge building boom. Today, only a few of these buildings remain.
Thanks, Robert. I just love the fact that we're preserving and using many of the original facilities for future generations to use. As we look across the river, we see Boblo Island as I know it. Deborah, what can you tell us about this little gem?
As you look across the Detroit River, it is easy to imagine a day when First Nations peoples paddled their canoes in the sparkling waters between the mainland and Bois Blanc. Today it's called Boblo Island. The island was called Whitewoods because of the many silver poplar and birch that had covered the island, giving it a shimmering white appearance. Today in Amherstburg, we acknowledge that the land on which we gather and live is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations.
The island is certainly rich in history, and I can't wait to see how the island is used in the future. Robert, would you like to take it from here and tell us about the next features on our tour?
Our journey has taken us across the old village of Amherstburg to its southern limit at Park Street. All the other north-south streets ended here. Just south of the Bois Blanc dock is the Canadian Coast Guard base. Evidence of the Coast Guard appears as far back as the 1700s. Today, the Canadian Coast Guard is not only responsible for the longest coastline of any given country, it is no surprise to have a Canadian Coast Guard station in the town of Amherstburg, as it sits at the mouth of the Detroit River at Lake Erie, which is one of the world's busiest international waterways.
Deborah, what can you tell us about the significant historical value of the Detroit River in our area?
The Detroit River is approximately 51 kilometers in length. It is regarded as one of the world's busiest international waterways. Since the late 1600s, the Detroit River region was regarded as an earthly paradise by French explorers. In 2001, the Detroit River was established as an international wildlife refuge based on the principles of sustainability and conservation. Today, it is the only international wildlife refuge in North America. The Detroit River is the only river with both an American and Canadian heritage designation.
Robert, can you pick it up from here and finish off the tour for us?
Well, Dalhousie Street continues south as a laneway that followed the shoreline down along the bank. The oldest home along the river is Bellevue. For 200 years, Bellevue has stood majestically as a reminder of a town and nation rebuilding after the War of 1812. This was the largest home in Upper Canada at the time. Bellevue was designated a National Historic Site in 1959 for its architectural importance. It is one of only 2 buildings in Canada designated for Palladian-style architecture. Bellevue has been unoccupied since 2001 and actually was placed on the top 10 endangered places list by Heritage Canada Foundation in 2009. Thanks to lobbying by citizens and the vision of the administration, the town of Amherstburg purchased Bellevue in 2016. It will continue to stand as a reminder of our origins and of the people who had the courage and fortitude to remain strong in the face of adversity.
Thank you so much to our guests, Robert and Deborah, for the guided tour. It's been wonderful to hear the many stories along the way and discover the rich heritage. Thank you to our listeners for joining us on this special episode. I hope you have enjoyed our guided tour of the historical mile in Amherstburg, and we encourage you to take the opportunity to walk the trail yourself. I hope you have enjoyed walking through the doors of heritage with us in this very special guided tour. If you know others who would enjoy the Doors of Heritage podcast, please share it. Until next time.